Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Rob.
And this is Ask Rob and Rob.
Hello everyone, welcome to Ask Rob and Rob, the show where you get your delightful questions in and we do our very best to give you a useful answer. This week is no different. We're going to try our very best. We've had our coffee, we're ready to go. But before we do, let's give you a quick reminder of how you can get your question onto the show.
Yep, all you've got to do is call 013 808 0035, that's 013 808 0035, or head over to propertyhub.net/ask. So all you need is a question. The mechanism couldn't be easier, and Dale is about to show you what the end result should sound like.
Hi Rob and Rob, this is Dale speaking. Long-term listener, subscriber and recent investor. Loving everything you're putting out there. I have a couple of related questions if I can. You have said recently that the Southwest is a place to avoid. First of all, I wondered if this is maybe less relevant to cities, but even if it is relevant to cities as well, does it really matter that it's had a boom during COVID and that's why it's to be avoided? Because if you're going to keep it long term, does it not come back around once the other places around the UK have had its place in the sun? Or is that cycle a bit too long to wait for it to come back around? Related to that, you also have mentioned the possible potential in Gloucester in your latest magazine, which is also southwest, which has confused me a little bit. I'm moving to Devon from northwest this year, so I'm wondering whether to invest near Devon or invest long distance in a northern city that's got more potential to grow sooner. Thanks in advance. Looking forward to your response.
Thank you, Dale. Really restricting my future holiday options with this answer, but I'm going to do it anyway. I think it's important to realise that when we're saying things on the podcast and in YouTube videos, we are, of course, speaking in generalities. What we're saying is if you could invest anywhere in the country, these places are more appealing to us, these places are less appealing. Obviously, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people in the Southwest who make investments there, and those investments work out very well. So if that's what you want to do because you want to keep it local or because your strategy relies on being local, that's totally fine. If that needs to be your area, then you'll be looking at the best possible investment you can make within that area. And you can absolutely forget about the rest of the country. But I'll explain why we are less keen on it if you are in a position to be picking from the entire country. And it's because, like you hinted at, it's had a big recent upward movement in prices. It's been the beneficiary of people moving out of London in the COVID boom. And it's therefore likely that there is less upward potential movement in prices and more downward potential movement in prices than there is elsewhere in the country. And if you're in a position where you can choose, why wouldn't you buy somewhere that's relatively better value, where there's more potential for prices to rise? So it's not saying there's anything staggeringly, horrendously wrong with the Southwest. It's just saying that because of recent history, there's probably better potential elsewhere. And like you said, of course, eventually it comes back around. So even if property prices do really struggle for the next few years and then just continue to stagnate while other areas take off, yes, eventually it'll come back around again. But why would you want to wait that long if you don't have to? But if you are investing in that area because that's the choice that you've got, then you don't have to worry about the rest of the country because that's off limits to you anyway. So it really is about making the best investment you can make. And I think that that's really important because we talk a lot about regions and areas, but ultimately the actual investment you make, the actual property you buy and the amount that you pay for it, the amount of rent you receive for it is incredibly important. If you choose the best area, then you're giving yourself a tailwind and that's great, but it all comes down to the individual investment. So don't let me put you off. If the Southwest is the place for you, that's fine. Focus on making the best investment you possibly can. Do your research, and I'm sure you'll do extremely well.
Alrighty, next up we have a question in from Dan.
Hi Rob and Rob, Dan here. Thanks for the great podcast and all the advice. With everything I've learnt so far with Property Hub, my wife and I have managed to buy 3 new build properties since 2020, so thank you for that. My question is, with all the mortgage rates going up at the moment, would it be an idea to buy a cheaper property outright, maybe around 85k, add some value to it and then secure a mortgage when the mortgage rates drop down? I'm aware that I need to be careful with elements that mortgage companies might not like, such as short leases and non-conventional construction. Interest rates don't quite add up for any monthly profit, but I know it's a long game, but there just seems to be some good deals out there that you might be able to achieve with no mortgage. Any advice would be great to hear from you.
Dan, thank you for your question. I'm sure you're not the only person who's considered this, so I really do appreciate you sending your question in because you're going to help a lot of people out here. Now, this might not be a shock answer, but it's all going to come down to the numbers because there is a lot of benefit to leveraging Rob and I have talked about this extensively on the podcast. So you're going to need a really good reason not to use a mortgage. And a really quick and a simple example of this is if you buy a property for 100k, and let's just say in the next few years it goes up by 10%. So if we buy it cash for 100k, we've made £10,000 uplift in capital growth. So 100k, now worth 110, 10,000 uplift. But if we had taken that 100k and instead purchased a property using a mortgage, and let's say we put 25% down, so we bought a £400,000 property, then when that property goes up by 10%, you've made £40,000. Now, of course, I'm rounding and I'm not taking into account all costs, but the difference is huge. It's a 4x return. It's a huge, huge difference. The difference between making 10,000 and 40,000. So, of course, you will have to pay for a mortgage, but that'll be offset by the rent. The rent on that property will be higher as well because it's a higher property value. Will you be able to make a little more cash on cash each and every month? Potentially. But you also run a few more different risks with that lower price property. You have tenant risk because often those type of properties are in areas where you may find it harder to attract a good tenant. You then have to take into account things going wrong. Now, the amount of rent you'll get on an £85,000 property will be fairly modest. So if a boiler goes on a cheap property, it's going to cost you, let's say, £1,500, £2,000 maybe to have it replaced. If it goes on a more expensive property, it's going to cost you roughly the same. But the rent on a cheaper property is obviously much less, so it wipes out a lot of the profit that you're going to make that year. So there are lots and lots of things to consider, and I could go on, but hopefully you're getting the point that it's not as simple as, well, mortgages are more expensive, so therefore I shouldn't leverage. Actually, leverage is still a ridiculously powerful tool if you believe that property goes up in value, at least over the long term. And history shows us that is very much the case. Now, an in-between option might be to go, okay, well, if mortgage products are a lot more competitive at 60% loan to value, for example, and speak to a broker and they'll be able to guide you around that, then maybe just put a bigger deposit down. And yes, the power of leverage won't work as hard in your favour, but it'll still be working for you. So, of course, crunch the numbers, have a look for yourself. Maybe the returns are so significantly better on those cheaper properties that you just can't turn that down. But the likelihood is you'll probably come to the decision that you'll go for leverage because of the power it offers you and some of the downsides a cheaper property can present. But ultimately, Dan, it will come down to you, your circumstances and your numbers. But hopefully that gives you a framework to consider it and help you make the best decision.
Well, there you go. 2 more answers dispatched, and we'll be back to do it all again this time next week. So do please join us and feel free to send in your own question. Just go to propertyhub.net/ask. Until we see you next, have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.